There are championship moments lost by inches. And then there's what McLaren did in Qatar. This wasn't a detail, it wasn't a nuance. It was a complete collapse of judgment at the most delicate point of the entire season. A collapse that didn't just change the race, it flipped the entire narrative of the title fight. Because when you watch the fastest team on the grid hand a victory on a silver platter to the most ruthless predator Formula One has seen in the modern era, you immediately understand the real issue. The problem is not speed. The problem is mentality, structure, nerves. And now the question is no longer whether they threw away the Qatar Grand Prix. It's whether they just handed over the championship as well. Breaking point was simple. Lap 7, opening pit window. A virtual safety car, a full safety car. The kind that resets the entire field, wipes every advantage, and gifts teams a free stop. It was the perfect moment to pit both cars, complete one of the mandatory stops, and maintain strategic control of the race. Piastri had the pace. Norris was solid. Everything was in McLaren's hands. They stayed out. And the moment you see Verstappen dive into the pit lane without hesitating for even a heartbeat, you understand the difference between a team trying to win a title and a team that already knows how to win one. Max did what champions do. He didn't wait, didn't debate, he didn't overthink. In that instant, the Qatar Grand Prix became a completely different race. And not because of what Red Bull did, because of what McLaren allowed. Before we go deeper, let me remind you quickly, if you're truly passionate about Formula One, check out Auto Formula. Miniatures, licensed merch, fast delivery. Using code MOTOR01 gets you 10% off and supports the channel link in the description. Let's continue. When a safety car bunches up the entire field, every engineer with a functioning pulse knows this. The advantage you built is gone. Piastri had executed the first stint to perfection. He had built a gap, managed his tires, controlled the pace, and all of that evaporated instantly. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is that McLaren not only ignored a blatantly obvious window, they ignored what the entire grid was doing. Andrea Stella later tried to explain the decision with 3 reasons. None of them hold up. The first excuse: we didn't expect everyone to pit. This is frankly alarming. We're talking about the very beginning of the pit window. A race with mandatory 2 stops. And the championship-leading team didn't consider that rivals would make use of a free stop under a safety car. That's not an error. That's a disconnect from race reality. Second excuse: we wanted flexibility. Translated, they preferred theoretical flexibility in a hypothetical future scenario, instead of securing the concrete, real, tangible advantage right in front of them. Elite strategy is never built on maybes. Championship-winning teams, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, in the Schumacher era, all understood the same truth. Never sacrifice real opportunity for hypothetical possibility. But McLaren did exactly that. The third excuse: we believed we were fast enough to rebuild the gap. Of course they were fast. But there is no universe in which you give 20 seconds to a 4-time world champion in the second-best car on the grid, and simply assume your driver will claw it all back in a title-deciding race. That's not optimism. That's irresponsibility. And underneath all these explanations lies the part nobody outside McLaren likes to acknowledge. FIA rules, that internal policy that prevents the team from splitting strategies when uncertainty rises. A rule designed more to protect the team's image than to maximize performance. A rule that makes sense in a normal season, but becomes suicidal in a championship fight. In Qatar, they followed the rule. They locked themselves in. Even in a 50-50 scenario, they didn't give Oscar the freedom to pit while Lando stayed out. They didn't split risk. They didn't play for the title. They played for aesthetics, for unity, for the idea of fairness. And the result is in full view. Verstappen walked away with 25 free points. Norris lost psychological momentum. Piastri lost a race that was genuinely in his hands. And Abu Dhabi became a minefield. And let's be honest, this wasn't an isolated mistake. The warning signs have been blinking for weeks. Double disqualification in Las Vegas, chaotic starts, confused radio calls. Qatar didn't create the pattern. Qatar exposed it. McLaren is not losing because it is slow. McLaren is losing because it feels the weight of the shirt when pressure rises. And pressure is exactly where Verstappen thrives. The truth is simple. The moment McLaren stayed out and Max didn't hesitate, the emotional ownership of the championship shifted. And that kind of shift almost never reverses. Because when you look at the standings today, you don't just see McLaren heading to Abu Dhabi with the best car. You see a team mentally shaken, out of rhythm, fragile at the worst possible moment. And that's dangerous. Nothing in Formula One is more dangerous than a fast but insecure team. A predator who can smell blood. Max doesn't need dominance. He only needs your mistake. In Qatar, he didn't need to fight. He didn't need heroics. He didn't need magic. He only needed to make the obvious decision. It was enough to flip the championship upside down. Everything that happened afterward was a consequence. Piastri didn't collapse. He paid the price for a decision he didn't make. Norris spent the rest of the race trying to minimize the damage and keep the title alive by sheer willpower. The problem isn't losing positions. The problem is losing narrative. Losing confidence. Losing the aura of a sharp, decisive team. And when you take a championship to the final race, those things matter more than any tenth of a second. There's a tiny detail most people missed. But to me, it explains everything. McLaren's silence when the race reset. From command, no clarity, no leadership. Championship teams don't freeze. They impose. Bull 2021 was chaotic, but never confused. Mercedes in the hybrid era made hard calls, but never hesitated. Ferrari under Schumacher sometimes played safe, but never looked lost. McLaren looks afraid of winning. This connects directly to their collapse in Las Vegas. Two cars disqualified for the same floor issue. Same weekend, same error. That doesn't happen to a team in control. It happens to a team drifting on the edge of chaos. Qatar wasn't an accident. It was a confirmation. And now they arrive in Abu Dhabi, in a position I honestly cannot remember seeing in a team this strong. The best car, two drivers with title chances, and a structure that buckles when the pressure spikes. The pilots are not the problem. Norris cracked in Vegas. Yes, Piastri had mistakes. Yes, but under true pressure, both have been more consistent than the team. It is completely upside down in Formula One. Should protect the drivers. Here, the drivers are protecting the team. Looking ahead at Abu Dhabi, the picture is brutal. If there's a safety car, if there's a 50-50 call, if there's a moment that requires instinct instead of policy, McLaren will need to do exactly what they have shown they cannot do. Break their own rules, split strategies, prioritize the title over aesthetics, and nothing indicates they will do that. Because they fear looking unfair. Red Bull never feared that. Mercedes never feared that. Ferrari under Schumacher never feared that. Championship teams understand a simple truth. Fairness is not equality. Fairness is winning. I'll say this clearly. That minute of confusion on lap 7 was the real moment the championship turned. Not because the points changed, but because McLaren showed they aren't ready. And when you show weakness against the biggest opportunist on the grid, the story of the season rewrites itself instantly. If McLaren lose the title in Abu Dhabi, it will be deserved. Not because they lacked speed, but because they lacked courage. A brilliant car doesn't win a championship by itself. It needs a team that knows how to handle its own pressure. McLaren isn't doing that. While Verstappen doesn't need genius. He only needs to wait. And if you let a predator smell fear at the end of a championship, he almost never misses. That is Qatar's legacy. And if nothing changes, it may well become McLaren's epitaph for 2025.